Okay, so now I've got the Buffalo Bills depth chart up here. I'll just go through their whole roster, just give my thoughts on kind of each position group and the players that they have got. So I think we'll start off with the receiver group. Pretty solid group overall. They got Stefan Diggs, one of the best receivers in the league. Led the NFL in receiving yards. I think receptions also. He was just very good last year, so you got him as your number one receiver. Very good. Amazing weapon for Josh Allen. Still a really good receiver, so I like it. Probably want to repeat how good he was last year, just with more weapons and players that they got. But I still think he'll be very good. The other receivers, Cole Beasley, definitely in the slot. He's one of the best slot receivers in the league. Just primarily only a slot receiver, though. Doesn't really play on the outside. That's not really what you have him on the field for anyway. He just kind of just plays in the slot. Is very good at that, so him and Stefan Diggs complement each other very well, and they're both very reliable targets who just won't really drop the ball and just really good overall players. So that's a good two options at the receiver position. And the third receiver is probably going to be Emmanuel Sanders, to be honest, because more of that veteran receiver, still pretty solid deep threat also, pretty reliable also. So he's still a decent player. I think he could definitely win that third receiver spot. I also think Gabriel Davis has a chance to beat him out because he was good last year in the snaps that he got. Like, he looked very good, very promising. But you definitely got him for the future anyway. Because, I mean, Emmanuel Sanders only a 1 year contract. Cole Beasley getting older. So the future probably Stefan Diggs, Gabriel Davis. Very good. Good bigger receiver, but also pretty good speed and could get separation. The other receivers aren't looking as good. Like, Isaiah McKenzie's pretty decent. Is like kind of another really returner, basically. Deep threat type of player. That's kind of what he'll play. Jace Kumero's an alright backup. And Marquez Stevenson's kind of the only really notable player because they drafted him, and I think he has a good chance to probably make the roster. If he does, I mean, he's basically just a vertical threat. That's kind of all he really is. Could be pretty good at that. I don't really know how much he brings to the team that they already got with the deep threats, but he could maybe bring some like good aspect to their offense. Kind of get a really speedy player. Could maybe be your returner if Isaiah McKenzie isn't. We'll have to see if he makes the roster. Could just be a practice squatter. Offensive line, we'll move on to Dion Dalkins, still pretty decent. He also played some guard last year. Probably moved to tackle. That's probably what he would play next year if he stays healthy. So we'll definitely see if he can hopefully have kind of a breakout year because he's been pretty decent. He hasn't really been amazing. Like, he hasn't really broken out, I would say, yet. Probably hasn't really lived up to the expectations that people thought. But I could see Dion Dalkins being pretty decent. They also got Tommy Doyle, the player from Miami of Ohio, who they drafted, who's just a really good athlete, really good backup, I think. They draft two offensive linemen. Their offensive line was already pretty decent. So I mean, Tommy Doyle, yeah, definitely gives you a decent backup side like that. Get some more depth on the offensive line is very good. It's probably be a replacement for what's that player they lost last year? They had the swing tackle. Can't remember. We went to the Cowboys, but yeah, John Feliciano also pretty decent guard. He's a bit older now, but he's still pretty solid. Nothing special. But could definitely still be a starting caliber player. Ike Botager, kind of rotational player, pretty versatile. And Forrest Lamp also, he's kind of can play tackle and guard. He definitely, you could say, is a bit of a bust. But again, as a backup, I think he could be pretty decent. Like, they've got a lot of good depth on this offensive line. I think Forrest Lamp could definitely be a good depth player. And we'll just, I mean, it's a good player to take a shot on. Like, just see if he still has something in him because he was drafted pretty early in the draft. I think it was either first or second round. They also got Mitch Morse at center. That's probably their biggest weak spot, really. He's not amazing. Mitch Morse, yeah. It's fine, though. Like, center, the least valuable position on the offensive line. So you don't really need an amazing player, but he's definitely probably their weak spot. Cody Ford at guard, another versatile player that can play tackle also. They do have a lot of versatility on this offensive line, but I think Cody Ford is pretty decent. If he's healthy, he's still a pretty good guard. So that's fine. Their interior is not as good as their tackles, I would say, but still pretty solid. Jack Anderson is kind of a really notable player from Texas Tech. He's a pretty good player. Well, he was at Texas Tech. I think he, again, just a really good backup. Like, they got some good depth now. If they want to make a playoff run, you need that depth, because if you just get a bunch of injuries on your offensive line, that's going to be very hard to bounce back from. So I do like Jack Anderson there. And then right tackle, they got Daryl Williams, who's very solid, kind of underrated. So I like him there. Very solid tackle still. So that's fine. Spencer Brown, also another really good athlete who's pretty raw prospect. So it's probably a good idea for him to maybe sit behind Daryl Williams. Could be a future replacement, I think, for Daryl Williams in the future. I think he definitely could, because he was a pretty good player coming out of the draft. Just needed a lot of development, really, and needed to get coached up. So I think learning behind like Daryl Williams, who's a bit older now, and just the whole Bills coaching staff, I think could be very beneficial for him. Also, Bobby Hart, who was a starter last year for the Bengals, that's pretty good as a backup. Like, he can be pretty reliable. He was actually one of the more stable players on the offensive line, but nobody was really good on the offensive line. So that's fine. I do like it as backup. Tight end, Dawson Knox, pretty decent as a tight end. He's good. He's a pretty good weapon. Not an amazing blocker, but solid. Solid dude. Also, Jacob Hollister is a pretty good receiving weapon as a tight end also. Like, they got some good receiving threats. They did lose their blocking tight end, Lee Smith, which I think could be a bit of a loss, but it's fine. He was basically just a tackle, really, and they got a lot of players that can use in his role because he didn't really catch the ball. But Jacob Hollister, Dawson Knox, they could be a pretty good duo, so I like that. Both pretty athletic tight ends. Quarterback, of course, Josh Allen. Breakout year last year was very solid. I could definitely see him repeating his play, maybe being an MVP candidate because he's very solid. Not very solid. He's better than solid. I've been saying solid too many times, bro. He's elite. Last year he definitely was elite. So I do like Josh Allen. Think he could have another really good season. Mitchell Trubisky as a backup is also pretty decent because, he's not been horrible at Chicago, but definitely, not who they would have drafted and was a good, the pick they would have took there. As a backup, for the Bills, yeah, that's very solid because some teams would probably want to start him. And Jake Fromm even, he was a pretty good player coming out. He was a strong arm player, pocket passer, really. Don't really know how he really will get any playing time besides the preseason. I doubt he's really anything. You got Josh Allen, he's your future. Maybe just a backup, really. And running back Devin Singletary, Zach Moss, they're a pretty good duo. They're nothing, I don't think they're ever going to be superstars or elite running backs. But I think it has a good 1-2 punch. I think it's pretty decent. And their offensive line's better this year also. So I could definitely see them. One of these dudes probably going to have to emerge as that number one running back. Devin Singletary had a good rookie year and then kind of dropped off a bit. Zach Moss was pretty decent. And they also got Matt Breida, who kind of a good speed threat. Will just burn you, really. So he's very good in that. Just a very fast player. We'll see if he can get some playing time. And Tyron Jones, Antonio Williams, Christian Way. We'll see if any of these dudes make the roster. We'll have to see. And the defense. Defensive line, we'll start with Jerry Hughes. Still pretty solid player. Yeah, Jerry Hughes still got some pretty good production. He's still a pretty solid player, good rotational player now probably in his career. I think him and Gregor, so you probably get more of the snaps, Jerry Hughes. Gregor should probably come in for some plays here and there. But Jerry Hughes really gets a lot of pressure, just doesn't really get the sacks. Good veteran player. I think will be a really good developmental coach, really, for Gregor Rousseau. He's just a very raw player. I think Gregor Rousseau definitely for the future. I didn't mind the draft pick. I quite liked it. So I think Gregor Rousseau, I don't know if he'll get a ton of playing time next year. But definitely for the future, because he's just a pretty raw player. he could be a very good player. And the interior, Ed Oliver, still pretty solid. They drafted him a couple years ago. We'll just have to see if he can develop some more. Vernon Butler's fine as a rotational player. Stella Tue, kind of more of a run stopper. Same with Harrison Phillips. They're kind of big run stoppers. Justin Zimmer actually saw some pretty decent play last year. So we'll see what he can do next year. I think he's pretty decent in that role. And the other defensive end, Mario Addison, probably doesn't deserve the contract that he has, but he's still pretty productive. But I could see him getting a bit of less snaps with AJ Epinesa and Carlos Boogie Basham. I think Epinesa gets some more playing time next year because he was a good player. They drafted him in the second round. Also, Carlos Boogie Basham, he has some versatility. I think he could play some defensive tackle next year. Probably more of an edge rusher, but he's a bigger edge rusher. So he could definitely play defensive tackle. He could maybe just make a full-on switch there. But I think that, yeah, next year, him and Gregory, so I don't know how much playing time they get. I think Boogie Basham is probably more pro-ready, but I do like both the players. And F.A. Obade even was pretty decent. I think he had like 5 sacks last year in a kind of rotational role. Just a really good athlete, just a really physical player, good run stopper and pass rusher even at points. I could see him getting more playing time than Gregory Rousseau just because Gregory Rousseau needs some development. So I do like F.A. Obade. I think he'd be a good player. And the linebackers, Matt Milano, they re-signed him. Very solid linebacker. He's a good pairing with Tremaine Edmonds. Tremaine Edmonds, you probably would have liked a bit more from him. He's been decent as a linebacker. Hasn't been anything that special, really. He hasn't really, I wouldn't say, lived up to the hype, really. Like, he's definitely not been as good, but he's been a solid player, really. And it's kind of what you expected. Like, I knew he was going to be a solid player, but maybe you would just expect more. He's kind of not really amazing in coverage, but yeah. AJ Klein, good backup linebacker. He got some playing time. Good blitzer. Like, he got quite a few sacks last year. So that's pretty decent. Tyler Matekovic, I don't know if he even makes a roster. I think they got some more players that could maybe take his spot. Especially in like Daryl Williams, Marquel Lee. I think they're probably better than Tyler. I would say Tyler. I'm not trying to say his surname. But yeah, so I definitely think Daryl Williams, like, he got some good snaps last year for Houston and was pretty decent. So even like players like Giles Harris, pretty good athlete. So we'll definitely see what happens at linebacker position. They definitely got their top two players. Just kind of the backups are the questions, because they got some players that could definitely get into that role, and some surprising people could maybe get cut. Like maybe AJ Klein gets cut. Probably not, but he's pretty decent. And then going on to the secondary, cornerback position, to Javis White, of course. One of the best cornerbacks in the league, very locked down. So he's very good. Probably a top 10 cornerback, definitely in the league. So that was a good player that they got. Levi Wallace, still pretty solid corner. Kind of the liability, but when you're just getting targeted the whole time because Tre'Davious White is just so good, like, you just won't get targets. Levi Wallace will just get kind of picked on a bit, and you definitely saw that in the times last year. So that's like probably why he doesn't look that good on the stat sheet. But he's still pretty decent. Like, probably not going to be here after next year, I would assume. I could see him definitely being gone after this year. You could definitely be a good pickup for a team that's looking for just a decent corner, a decent solid, like, starting corner, really. Tyron Johnson also in the slot was pretty good last year. So you got your slot corner there. Saran Neal's kind of more of a backup. We'll see if he makes the roster. They got some good players like some good rookies, actually, like Rashad Wildgoose. That was a pretty good player that they got. I can't remember if it was undrafted or I think it might have been undrafted or just a late round pick, but he was pretty good at Wisconsin. So I definitely think he makes the roster. Good backup. I think Elijah Griffin was one of the best free agency pickups out of the whole NFL, because people really liked him. Some people like had third round grades on him and everything and all that. Fell to undrafted free agency, kind of just a stick, really. Like, he's not big, but he's still really. I think he could have some upside because he's shown some really good play at USC and has been basically a lockdown corner. I struggled at points, but overall at USC, like, that's not really undrafted player tape. So I definitely think he could be a sneaky player and could replace Levi Wallace in the future. And the safeties, Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, very good corner safety duo. Probably one of the best in the league. You could say because they're both very good. Kind of Micah Hyde, that more veteran player, very good player. Same with Jordan Poyer, that younger player, still not that young like both of them, but just two very good safeties. DeMar Hamlin's also a good backup. He could play corner also, so he's pretty versatile. So that's fine. Tariq Thompson also, that was a pretty good undrafted pickup. So they got a lot of ways they could go. Like, I think their secondary is very solid. And I think their whole defense really is good. Like, they got good depth on the defensive line. Linebacker position, they got some players. And secondary, like, it's kind of just that second cornerback, besides from Tre'Davious White. Like, you don't really know if Levi Wallace is good or not. We'll just have to see with him. And I mean, Matt Hack, punter's good. Tyler Bass was a good rookie last year. Reed Ferguson, yeah, it's pretty good. Special teams, like Isaiah McKenzie was a good returner. Marcus Stevenson can get some returning snaps if he makes the roster. So, I mean, the Bills are definitely trying to compete for the Super Bowl. They definitely got the roster to do it. They do have some weaknesses, of course, but he's very good. That's, like, I mean, of course, they got the quarterback. We'll see if Josh Allen, I mean, you just don't want him to take a step back. I don't think he will. But their offensive line is better, good receiving weapons, running back groups I think will be fine, and defense solid. So I think the Bills could be good next year. And the next team, we'll just go through all the teams one by one. So stay tuned, and I'll see you next.